their function, that's a little bit less on how we name them, but it does help in their shape does help inform their function. Yeah.
Layers.
The numbers of layers by the shape and layers. What shapes do we have? We have 3 of them. Squamous, cuboidal, columnar. And then you can either be simple or you can be stratified. Simple has 1 layer, stratified has many. Okay? Connective tissue, that's a whole thing on its own, right? We have loose connective tissue, we have dense connective tissue, we have bone, we have blood. See chart. Those are all connective tissues, right? Loose connective tissue has 3 different types: the areolar, adipose, reticular. Yeah, I'm testing you. Dense has 3 types as well, right? Regular, irregular, elastic, right? Cool. Muscle tissue, muscle tissue. There's 3 different types of muscle tissues. What are they? Skeletal. I heard them both. Smooth and cardiac. And then what's our last tissue type? Nervous tissue. Yeah. Right? That's mostly going to be your nerves, neuroglia, etc. Okay? So from our epithelial tissue is glands. We make a lot of glands from our epithelial tissue. Okay? Those glands can be in kind of 2 different natures. We have endocrine glands and exocrine glands. Endocrine glands, they are special because they do not have any ducts. They are ductless. Okay? They secrete their protein, liquid, whatever, directly into the tissue surrounding it. Okay? You might have heard of your endocrine system. That is something that we will talk about more in chapter 17. But your endocrine glands produce messenger molecules called hormones. And that'll be one of the main big topics that we talk about in chapter 17. Those hormones, what they do, where they send information, etc. You can think of your exocrine system as your long-range messenger system. All right? The second type of gland that we kind of talk about are exocrine glands. Exocrine, what does that root exo mean? Out. So where do we think that these glands are going to take stuff? Outside the body, to an epithelial surface, usually your skin or something else, something close, okay? These exocrine glands do have ducts. They are ductful, if you will. You don't have to, but they have ducts, okay? Some of the glands that we talk about that are exocrine glands, we have mucus secreting glands, we have sweat and oil glands. There's another type of gland. Can anyone think of that gland?
The one in your mouth, right?
Yeah, the salivary glands in your mouth. Very similarly to our other epithelial tissues, the way that we classify and name glands has to do with how many cells you usually find in there. You can have unicellular exocrine glands. You can have multicellular exocrine glands. Okay? Just keep that in mind. Yeah, dude, say that. It's like I was saying, multicellular, unicellular, and multicellular. There's only one type of unicellular exocrine gland that we care about, and it's the goblet cell. Okay? Goblet cells are super important for your body. They produce a protein called mucin. That's my little symbol for protein. So if you see that, that's just me not wanting to write the whole word protein. Okay? That mucin plus water equals mucus. All that yucky, drippy stuff that babies and toddlers tend to just have running out of their nose like they don't have anything to stop it. Like they've never blown their nose in their lives, because honestly, they probably haven't. All that yucky stuff is made of mucin and water. Mucus serves to protect and lubricate. Many of the internal body surfaces. Okay? And like I said, goblet cells are a unicellular exocrine gland. And they kind of look like a little goblet. Like this is the base of the cup, and this is the little part, right? So all of this could be a very nice little green, what's a fancy wine name? A Mugo Grigio. Mugo Grigio. Grigio. Delicious. Drink it. Don't drink it. Okay? Multicellular exocrine glands have two basic parts to them. They have an epithelial wall duct. And then they have a secretory unit. And that kind of ends up looking like this. So if these are my little epithelium, and then we have our little plip. Note all of these, the secretory unit is also made up of epithelial tissue, right? It's all epithelial cells, but epithelial cells with slightly different functions, okay? The red ones secrete things. And then the other ones are just kind of structure, okay? Similarly to the other epithelial tissue, we can classify them by the structure of their duct. That duct can either be simple or it can be compound. And then the secretory unit is more descriptive of the shape, right? So you can have tubular secretory units, alveolar secretory units, and then the last is, take a wild guess. Remember how I said biologists aren't very creative? The third secretory unit is a combination of the tubular and alveolar, so they truly just named it tubulo-alveolar. Biologists are not creative. It's not their job. They say it looks like this, it looks like this. Shove the words together, works for me. Okay? So this is kind of what we're talking about, right? So in a simple duct structure, the duct itself does not branch, right? The duct is the yellowish cells up in here. That part is the duct, okay? the duct isn't branched. So it's simple. In this one, the duct is not branched, but the structure, the tubular structure is. So in this case, we would name this one a simple branched tubular gland. Because it is simple, the duct did not branch, the tubes did. This one is just a regular, degular, simple tubular. It did not branch at all. Where you will find difference is in the compound ducts. This duct splits into 3. See that? A little marker right on there. That duct splits into 3. That is a compound duct. So that's a compound tubular. The tubes just, the only difference between tubular and alveolar, tubular looks like tubes, literally. And the alveolar are little like sacs. They're a little bit more circular, okay? So that's the difference between a simple branched, and a compound. Does that make sense? Are there any questions? Okay, cool. Another thing that I'll note about glands, there are 3 different types of glands: apocrine, holocrine. Maybe there's just 2, apocrine and holocrine. Holocrine glands will break off of the whole thing breaks open to release the substance. Apocrine glands just release a little. That's not super vital information, but it's just good to know. Okay? So that's glands in a nutshell. Next, we're going to talk about how cells kind of join together. We're going to talk kind of cell junction. There's a few different ways that cells can kind of join together. Question: why do we think cells may need to kind of join together? To survive. Yeah, it is definitely part of their survival. What else? So that they can work together. Yeah. It's a lot easier to communicate through an open door than it is through a closed door, right? Right? So if I was trying to tell you something and you were standing on the other side of this wall here, you could probably hear me a lot better if the door's open than if the door's closed, right? Okay. So cells join together both to enable communication, sending of ions, molecules, all kinds of stuff from one cell to the other without having to go through all of the packaging it in a vesicle, sending it outside the cell, putting it back into the cell, process all of that nonsense. You just send it right through like a text. Okay? So some of the factors that help to bind those epithelial cells together are adhesion proteins that help link the plasma membranes from one cell to another cell. The contours of the adjacent cell, we can kind of think of those as like a lock and key mechanism, right? So if one side has a kind of wiggly guy, the other side will also have that kind of wiggly guy so they can fit in like a key and hang out together, okay? And then the last bit, most important bit, are these special cell junctions. There are a few different types of special cell junctions, and we're going to talk about them in just a few minutes. As much as your cells do want to communicate with each other, send things from one side to another, mix things around, all that stuff, there's also some things that should not be passing through that plasma membrane, right? So the first cell junction that we talk about actually helps to prevent certain molecules from passing in between the cells of the epithelial tissue, okay? Tight junctions, also known as zona occludens. What does it mean to occlude something? To stop, to block, right? Zona occludens helps to block some of that intercellular space so that stuff can't just pass through willy-nilly, okay? These tight junctions are found in the apical region. What is the apical region again? The top, the top part of most of your epithelial cells, okay? Some of the proteins from the plasma membrane and cells next to each other get fused to each other, so they kind of make a little door that blocks things off, okay? And like I said, they are there to prevent certain molecules from passing between cells within epithelial tissue. And then this image off to the side is kind of what those look like. So you can see these proteins. All of these little circles are little linker junctional proteins that are kind of blocking off, just tightening so that it closes off some certain areas of the space on the sides of the cells. Okay, so this is one cell's plasma membrane, this is another cell's plasma membrane, and they're having a nice big hug that no one can leave. You can never escape, you cannot come out. Mama, you know what I mean? That's what those ones are doing, okay? Next on our list, we have adhesive belt junctions. These are more of an anchoring protein. Adhesive belt junctions, also known as zona adherens. We all know what it means to adhere something to something else. It's basically just a fancy word for gluing. I can glue my hands together. I'd adhered my hands together. Don't know why I would do that, but I could if I wanted to. Okay? They have these transmembrane linker proteins that attach to the actin microfilaments and the cytoskeleton of the cells next to them. Okay? So these adhesive belt junctions, along with the tight junctions, make these complex apical lateral borders. Some are open, some are closed, some are we can glue them together, we can pull them apart, all that jazz, okay? These adhesive belt junctions help to kind of keep the cells kind of together, but not really. It's more so just kind of closing off some of those gaps. It's like glue, but it's not like super glue, it's more like Elmer's glue that's kind of old, if that makes sense, right? So like they're still kind of stuck together, but you could pull them apart if you really tried. You could, wouldn't be too hard. Okay? Pardon. The main way that cells will join together is through the use of desmosomes. Desmosomes, you can think of these as cell anchors. Okay? Pardon me, sorry. So desmosomes kind of show up on these sides, like everything else, because we're talking about lateral cell features, right? On the sides of those plasma membranes. They kind of start as a little circular plaque that's joined by some linker proteins. Let's get some protein in here. Right? And then you have these circular plaques are attached to their own cells by their intermediate filaments. And they help to anchor that desmosome to the cell itself. Okay? Does that kind of make sense? From there, when those linker proteins kind of meet up with the other linker proteins from the other desmosome, they form almost like a zipper, right? Like interlocking chains. Kind of see my fingers like this. Sorry for the recording, you can't see my fingers, but everyone else can, right? And then it's a lot harder to pull these interlocking chains apart, right? That way, the cells can stay close to each other. That's how they anchor themselves to one another, right? So let's do this. I'm going to pick some people. Volunteer or you will be voluntold. That's what it looks like.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. They're linked in the middle, but they have stuff kind of hanging them to their own cells so they don't go too far, you know? But they're all still linked together. Okay? Next on our list, gap junctions. Gap junctions, these are our small little alleyways. These are our small alleyways where like the undercover stuff happens. Not really undercover, but like they just kind of let if you're small enough to fit through, you can go. If we don't see it, we didn't see it. That's essentially what the gap junctions do, right? They let small molecules move directly between cell to cell, and they're connected by like a little cylinder, and they're used for intercellular communication. Okay, so there's small little alleyways where you can, you know, kick a ball to your friend on the other side of the street because your mom said not to cross the stop sign. Does that kind of make sense? Mm-hmm. You know, when you're a kid, you're not supposed to cross the stop sign or the street light, but your friend lives on the other side of that street, right? Mm-hmm. And you just want to play soccer, so you're just gonna kick that ball through the alleyway. It'll get all the way to your friend, and you technically didn't leave your street. So who's really wrong now, Mom? Not me. Does that make sense? Great. I hope all of my little analogies to real life are helpful. And that's kind of what they look like. They're just little passageways to let some things pass through. Okay? Cool. So we've talked about some of the apical features. We're going to talk about a couple of more apical features in a minute, but let's talk about some of the basal features. The basal lamina is essentially just a layer of non-cellular material. Usually it's just a bunch of like proteins and other cell things that lay in between the bottom cell layer and the connective tissue below. So all of these proteins kind of in the middle. These proteins are secreted by your epithelial cells. Okay. So it's important about basal lamina, a non-cellular supporting sheet between the epithelial tissue and the connective tissue underneath. This basal lamina has a couple of functions. One, it acts as a little bit of a selective filter to help determine what molecules from the capillaries can enter epithelia and which ones cannot, right? Remember that plasma membrane is there to keep the good things in and the bad things out. That's the same across the board. There's a bunch of different filters and mechanisms that your body has in place to keep good in, bad out. Not even necessarily good or bad, but that's ions and charges. That's a biochem problem, not me. Other thing that the basal lamina does is it acts as a scaffold or a mold, right, to help for epithelial cells to regenerate on, right? They wouldn't be able to just kind of start regenerating from nothing. There's at least a little bit of a layer that helps them do their thing. The basal lamina and reticular connective tissue help to form kind of that basement membrane. A lot of the time, you'll see basal membrane, basal membrane, basal lamina, all kind of used interchangeably. They are interchangeable, but they're not necessarily the same, okay? Basement membrane is basal lamina plus reticular layers. Basal lamina is just basal lamina. So I know we bounced a little bit. We talked about the lateral side structures that help to join cells together. We talked a little bit about the basal structures, the basal lamina. Now we're going to talk about some of the apical surface features that cells might have. I talked about these a little bit in lab. One of them is used to increase surface area. The other one is used for movement. Do we remember which is which? Yeah. Microvilli. Oh, I don't want that in blue. Microvilli are these finger-like projections of the plasma membrane that help to increase the surface area of a cell. You're going to see a lot of microvilli in places that do quite a bit of secretion and absorption. So you'll find them a lot in like your digestive system. You'll find them in sometimes your trachea, kind of just depends, okay? Those microvilli, yeah, they maximize surface area. That's what they do. That's their job. They're surface area guys. They just make it so that there is more space to secrete more things, okay? They look kind of weird. They literally just look like little fingers, okay? The other one that we talk about, the cilia. They're so silly, right? Get it? Haha, guys, that was funny. Okay, anyways. So the cilia, these are whip-like, super movable projections, usually at the apical surface of our epithelial tissue. They are made of a core that's held together by cross-linking proteins and radial proteins, but that's not super important for your information, for your brains right now, okay? Those microtubules are arranged in pairs, and those pairs are called doublets. And you have 9 pairs of doublets. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. My circle got a little wonky, but you have 9 pairs of doublets surrounded by a central pair of doublets. Each of those doublets has proteins on the side of it. Those proteins are what connect to each other. They connect from one doublet to the next doublet, and that's what causes that kind of jerking movement to whip and whip back. You go whip and whip back. That protein is called dynin. Dynin is is exclusively a motor protein. So it helps to move things. I think I spelled that wrong. Okay. That's kind of what it looks like. So you have all of your 9 doublet rings kind of going around or locked around a central doublet. And this is kind of the process. It grabs one, and folds back up, and it folds back up, and it folds back up, and that's how it moves stuff. Okay. So, you talked about epithelial tissues, we talked about super specific lateral, basal, apical cell structures that you may or may not see. Now let's talk about how kind of all of these things move together. So in your body, you have lots of membranes and linings and all of that stuff. And they're usually, because remember, the function of epithelial tissue is to cover, right? Covering, lining, overall, that's its job. So the membranes and linings of your body are made up of epithelial tissue and connective tissue. They're what we call a compound tissue. They cover areas broadly within the body, and they're usually an epithelial sheet and underlying connective tissue. There are 3 types of membranes that we talk about. The first is your cutaneous membrane, and that's just your skin. Has lots of epithelial tissue that is lined and underlined by connective tissue. Next on our list is the mucous membranes. Those mucous membranes line hollow organs that open to the body's surface. An example of a mucous membrane, your nose. Your nose is a great mucous membrane. Remember all that snot that the kids be dripping? Mucous membranes, okay? Going into your mouth, that's a mucous membrane. The lining of your cheeks, mucous membrane, okay? Last on our list are serous membranes, okay? Serous membranes are usually just simple squamous epithelium that we call mesothelium. If you or your loved one have been impacted by mesothelioma, please call this number. Y'all remember those ads? Y'all heard those ads? They're talking about the lining in certain areas of your body, the simple squamous epithelium lying on top of some areolar connective tissues. These serous membranes line closed cavities. Mucous membranes line opened ones, serous membranes lined closed ones. Some examples of those closed cavities are your pleural cavity, your peritoneal cavity, and your pericardial cavity. Pleural covers your lungs. Peritoneal covers your abdomen. Pericardial covers your heart. And they produce a substance called serous fluid. And that serous fluid helps to lubricate, helps to keep things from kind of sticking to one another, right? Because you wouldn't want your lungs to stick to the walls of your lungs, right? Because the tissue on you have the visceral and the parietal pleura. Remember this vaguely? Coming up. Okay. Yeah. What was that? Peritoneal. I'll write that better. Sorry. Peritoneal cavity. Okay. Cutaneous. It's just your skin. Mucous membranes. Anything that's going in that could find its way to the surface of your body, it's going to be a mucous membrane. So like your nose, your mouth, your anus, the vagina, those are all mucous membranes, okay? And then serous membranes line closed cavities. And remember we talked about visceral and parietal. We talked about that kind of in chapter 1. The parietal pleura is the outer layer. The visceral is the inner. Okay? Same thing for peritoneum and pericardium. Visceral is inner, parietal, outer. Okay. Sometimes in this life you get hurt. You fall down, you scrape your elbow, you do all kinds of stuff, and sometimes it hurts. Okay? Your tissues will respond to that injury in a couple of different ways. The first is an inflammatory response. This one is quick and is more damage control than anything. Your immune response is what actually throws in your immune system, your white blood cells, your neutrophils, your all that kind of stuff, your B cells, your T cells. And it takes a little bit longer to show up, but it is very, very specific. Very specific. Okay. So we've all fallen down or hurt ourselves. When you hurt yourself, what are some of the symptoms that show up, right? Yeah, we get things like redness, swelling, hot. What's one more symptom? Pain. It's gonna hurt. You slice your arm, it's gonna hurt, right? It's gonna get red, it's gonna swell, it's gonna be warm to the touch. Why? Because when that tissue gets damaged, the cells start sending chemical messengers to the rest of the body and nearby blood vessels. There you go. To start doing things like, hey, we got hurt. I can't handle this on my own. I need help. Which tells you if your cells, the very basic unit of your body, needs help sometimes, it's okay for you guys to need help sometimes too, right? Yeah. Say yes.
Yes.
Nod your heads. Thank you. So what are we going to do when we need help? Ask. We will call our chemical messengers and say, hey, I need some help. I can't do this on my own. That's just a little aside. Anyways, so those chemical messengers start to send messages to your blood vessels to dilate, to start sending more blood, right? More blood, we get more blood sent to an area. What's that going to do? It's going to make it a little red because your blood is red, right? It's going to add a little bit of heat. There's more stuff coming to it, right? There is a protein. That protein is called a histamine. We take antihistamines all the time. You have bad allergies, you're taking an antihistamine. Histamines increase the permeability of capillaries, okay? When it increases the permeability of capillaries, those capillaries are not as good at either keeping liquid in or keeping liquid out, right? That's what increased permeability means. Because they're not good at keeping liquid in anymore, that fluid starts to leak out. That leaking out of fluid is called edema. That's when we get swelling. We get that edema, we get that swelling so that our bodies can help kind of dilute any of the toxins that might be secreted from bacteria, because anytime you make an entry, an exit into your skin, you are introducing some brand new bacteria into your system, okay? So edema, that accumulation of fluid, helps us to dilute some of those toxins so they're not as effective, helps to bring oxygen and nutrients from your blood to the area, right? Because in order to repair, it's going to need oxygen, it's going to need nutrients, it's going to need all that stuff. And it helps to bring antibodies to help fight the infection. And that's the beginning of the immune response. How is it going to repair itself? Through a couple of different mechanisms. There's two main ways that our bodies will repair. One is regeneration. Regeneration is essentially just replacing those dead, destroyed tissues with tissues of the same type. So if I damage my skin, I get a paper cut or something like that, the cells that are going to replace it are going to be simple squamous epithelium. They'll be keratinized, and they won't be simple, they'll be stratified, but you know what I mean, right? They'll be the same cells that got broken will be replaced. The other way that we repair is the process of fibrosis. Fibrosis, instead of replacing the damaged tissue with tissue of the same type, it replaces it with fibrous tissues. So it's mainly connective tissue, okay? Granulation tissue. Granulation tissue is just new tissue that is like that fresh pink scar. Okay. Organization is the process of the blood clot being replaced by that granulation tissue. No matter what, that blood is going to clot. Part of why that blood was flowing to the spot of the area was so that it could stack it up, clot it, so it doesn't keep bleeding, so you don't bleed out, right? Next couple slides just kind of go through the specifics of tissue repair on a skin wound. You can kind of see, so you get the cut, the blood clots, those inflammatory chemicals start to kind of say, hey, blood vessel, be a little bit more permeable, be a little bit more dilated, pass a lot more stuff through me. That way I can increase my heat, because heat can kind of sometimes kill bacteria. Bacteria function in a very specific temperature range. Increase your heat, increase your my entire brain just shut down. Swell to dilute all of that bad stuff out of there, all of that jazz. Okay, great. Some cells have a better capacity for regeneration than others. Let's start with epithelial tissue, bone, connective tissue. Do we think that has good regenerative ability or bad regenerative ability? Good, yeah. It is good to excellent. These guys will regenerate like nobody's business, okay? Cardiac muscle, nervous tissue, do those regenerate? No, not really. If you have a heart attack and your part of your heart muscle dies, there's no coming back. That heart muscle is not going to come back, okay? So you got to be very careful with your heart and your brain. Recently, there have been some studies that show that sometimes these cells can regenerate just a little bit. We have stem cells that can kind of be shoved out to necessary areas, but those are not reliable enough for us to depend on our stem cells regenerating our heart tissue, right? Okay. Skeletal muscle, cartilage, those are weak regenerators. Smooth muscle, dense connective, those are moderate. Okay. If you pull a muscle in your, not pull a muscle, if you pull or you rip a tendon in your ACL, that's going to take a minute to heal, right? That ACL one, that's going to take a spicy second to heal up because they're not great regenerators, okay? Throughout your life, your epithelial thins, collagen decreases, bones, muscles, nervous tissues atrophy, and poor nutrition and poor circulation will lead to poor health of your tissues overall. So take care of your tissues now while you're young so that when you're old, you don't have crumpling muscles and bones. Okay? Cool. Bye. See you on Monday, and we will hit chapter 5. Nope. Tuesday. Time isn't real. You know who I am.